Hello and welcome to the channel. My name is Annalisa Ely, and today I'm going to be talking about how the movies and shows that I watched when I was a kid have affected my reading taste to this day. So when I was a kid, I read quite a lot, but I didn't read all that widely. I found some books that I really liked and I read them over and over again, such as the Del Toro series. I really liked those, so I read them over and over, and I knew I was safe from character death with them, so I was always a little bit scared to branch out from there because I had been burned a few times, sometimes with character death, sometimes with just other things happening that I didn't like. But something that I branched out a little bit more with, that I consumed a little bit more of, was TV shows and movies. So both of these things ended up really shaping my ideas of what stories could be and what they could lend to my life, and what my favorite things like tropes ended up being, and also kind of cemented in my head what bad guy characters look like. So let's start with the stars. Star Wars, Stargate, Star Trek. I watched all of these as a kid, really enjoyed them. Didn't enjoy the original series of Star Wars as much as the prequels. Nowadays, I enjoy the original series quite a bit more. I think it's a little bit more adultish, and is a little bit easier to appreciate when you're a little bit older, whereas the prequels with their fast action and CGI aliens and somewhat ridiculous subplots were very engaging to me as a kid, and are a little bit less so nowadays. That said, I did not like the third prequel, but I really loved the political intrigue in the first and second prequels. And I also loved Padme Amidala because she's freaking amazing. And that was about my second exposure to the bodyguard trope, and probably my first exposure to the body double trope, and I really liked both of those. My first exposure to the bodyguard trope I'll talk about in a video I plan on making very similar to this one about how video games shaped my reading taste. Also, the prequels I think definitely enhanced how much I like really weird looking CGI aliens and CGI creatures, and I think increased how well I'm able to imagine really weird looking fantasy and sci-fi creatures when I read them in a book, when I haven't actually seen them. Then there's Star Trek, which introduced me to a ton of tropes, because it's a very long series, a set of series, because I watched Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, and Voyager, so altogether that's like almost 25 seasons worth of stuff. And I was watching these maybe when I was a little too young for them because my mom watched them and I just watched whatever she was watching, and that's the theme for several of these, because that's also how I got introduced to Stargate and also Lord of the Rings and Jane Austen, actually, because these aren't kids shows, which I'll tell you about as well, but I watched them when I was kids show age because that was what was being played on my TV. And Star Trek definitely gave me the standard of liking to see social commentary in my media. Almost every episode was social commentary. Sometimes it was just, you know, interpersonal relational stuff that wasn't particularly social commentary, and sometimes there was a lot of action that wasn't social commentary, but that was very rare. Almost every episode was talking about disability or looking at race in a different way. Because of all the alien species, there is a lot of opportunity to talk about racism, but through a different lens of different species and aliens, and not only how people look at species that are different from their own, but how species look at different races within their own that are still their same species. It was always doing stuff with gender, talking about people with peoples with multiple genders, people who had sexism reversed, and was it really reversed, and what would happen if women were on top. And then sometimes they'll look at more specific issues that are like very obvious what they're talking about, where they talk about gay rights or Should evolution be taught in schools was an episode that was in Deep Space Nine. So I really liked that, and I liked getting to see it from all these different perspectives that I didn't get to see in real life. Like, I saw people arguing about things, more so when I got older. Definitely I noticed that a lot more as I got to be like a tween rather than I started watching them in grade school. But I had seen these arguments in real life and seen them in this sci-fi format where they came at it from different angles and didn't have it with the same old entrenched views with like a set of views that all goes together. It was much easier to dissect the problems and like actually form my own opinions rather than just have a whole set of opinions taught to me. So that was really cool and definitely very influential. Tropes that I saw for the first time: forbidden love slash mutual pining between, what's his name, Will Riker and Counselor Troi. Friends to lovers. Lots of friends to lovers actually throughout the show. That was quite popular, and so that definitely like increased how much I enjoy it and how much I look for it in things that I read. A little bit of enemies to lovers in Star Trek Voyager, and within each episode there were a lot of smaller tropes or tropes on a smaller scale that were going on, like the Pon farr that happens to Vulcans where they get this overwhelming need to mate. I haven't actually seen that much of that trope outside of sci-fi TV shows, but I suspect I would find it if I had dipped my toes a little farther into paranormal romance. On to Stargate. We've just done a rewatch of this, so it's fresh in my mind, and it made me realize I was also recently reading Legendborn, and there is a character in Legendborn who, directly after he's introduced, I immediately disliked him because, and I figured out it was because of 3 key characteristics. First of all, he was an old white man. He was Southern. He had a Southern accent specifically, because everyone in the book was Southern. But specifically, I don't know, it felt like his Southern accent was more pushed forward or emphasized than some of the other characters. And like the 3rd page after meeting him, he misapplies the Bible. And once those 3 things were combined, I was like, you suck. I hate you. Even though he hadn't done anything actually despicable yet, I was just like, you're a bad guy. I don't like you. I don't want to be around you. I want the main character to stay away from you. I wasn't sure where this very strong feeling came from. And then I was rewatching Stargate, and there's this character called Senator Kinsey, and he was an old white man with a Southern accent who talked about God in ways that are not accurate and were completely to push his own agenda. And that visceral dislike came out again, and I realized, I told my mom, I think that liberal media, which Stargate is, as well as Star Trek and several others, has been teaching me to hate Southern white men for a long time. Because, and obviously this is now reflective, now that I am out in the world and aware of politics and have seen Southern white men who misapply scripture talk. This has obviously been reinforced by real life people who I dislike. People who live in the South who are not old white men who misapply scripture, I have no problem with you. This is a very specific combination of things that makes me dislike a person. But yeah, this guy is a bad guy for a significant part of the arc of Stargate over several seasons, and he's made to be extremely unlikable, and I think that that combined with real world experience has made me just have that visceral reaction to those characteristics. But that one also, I really liked the women representation, having Carter in there. It was good to see Teal'c as well. But and that also influenced how much I like stoic characters with Staff gushy insides and formal characters who care a lot about honor. And for Carter, it increased how much I like scientists, lady scientists, and it was nice that the dorky person who always wants to help people too much is not her, it's one of the white men. It's in Dr. Jackson, so that was also appreciated. And much like Star Trek, it was always doing the same thing where it would do a lot of social commentary and compare, well, what would we think of this social structure if we saw it in an alien's culture instead of our own? Would we be a lot more picky about it if we saw somebody else doing it who isn't entrenched in our culture? And if we saw it done in a slightly different way, is it really so much different from what we do? And I appreciated that once again. As a kid, I didn't really know what was going on with that, but as I got older, I was like, I recognized that had become sort of entrenched in how I view the world and how I am critical of the world and of information that comes in, and I'm always comparing it and trying to see if it makes sense and whether that's right and fair. Briefly, for movies, I'll talk about how Lord of the Rings made me love lady warriors such as Éowyn, and also Arwen as she's portrayed in the movie, and Friends to Lovers, there are several of those, and absolute wonderful best friends like Frodo and Sam made me really enjoy platonic relationships like that, and also the trio of Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli and how wonderful they were together. And also enemies to best friends as Gimli and Legolas are. Those all definitely made me look for those in books that I read, as well as really enjoying elves and things like that. I'll talk about this more in my video games video, but I named all of my characters in the first stories I started writing after Lord of the Rings characters. Like, they were totally different characters, but they were just named after those characters because I didn't have any cats to name after all of these characters, so I needed to have them in my life somewhere, because our cat was already named Butter at the time. Then kid shows, I absolutely adored Power Rangers. I loved how they constructed story arcs and the lore that they came up with. I felt like it was really interesting, and I actually still rewatch these shows occasionally because even though the action sequences and a lot of the dialogue is more kid level, the concepts and the world building are more older person level, where an older person can still really enjoy them. So those really enhanced my standards for children's fiction and children's TV shows, because I knew that as a child, even though I didn't mind this silly dialogue and silly fight scenes, I really liked this world building. I really got into it. So clearly kids can understand and do actually have high standards for world building if you give it to them. Things like That's So Raven and Hannah Montana affected my views on women and the places that we could hold and the things that we could be, because those were more set in real life as opposed to sci-fi and fantasy. Definitely gave me a perceived idea of what real life school is like, because I was homeschooled, and so TV shows were basically my biggest window into what public school was like. Informed my reading of public school books to this day. And those shows occasionally also looked at things like fat phobia and racism and sexism, and shaped my ideas on those as well. The last one I want to talk about is Barbie movies. I watched these religiously as a kid. I got the first one fairly soon after it came out, and then every one after that came out 6 months like clockwork for quite a while. And they were beautiful original stories that once again had a little bit of childish dialogue, but were really deep as far as world building and plot, and had all sorts of ideas that were so fascinating to me as a kid, or so inspiring, and inspired me to come up with stories to play with my dolls, even if I never wrote them down. Alina from the Fairytopia series, which there are like 3 or 4 movies in this series, was the first, I think, woman I had ever seen in a movie or TV show that had zero romantic plot, except maybe from the Power Rangers. I think some of the Power Ranger girls didn't have any romance involved, but it it was very uncommon to see a female character without any romance plots around her. Especially in Barbie movies, they always paired up, but in these Fairytopia ones, she didn't have no man, she didn't need no man, and there were male characters, but she was just friends with them, and she was friends with other female characters, and I absolutely really appreciated that. Eventually, I think they hired different writers or something because they stopped turning out the type of quality that they used to, but for about 5 or 6 years, so about a dozen movies, they were just doing a really amazing job making children's fiction that was really high quality, and usually a lot of children's fiction is a bit lazy. Plus gorgeous outfits. I loved whoever animated all those outfits. They did a wonderful job. So that is how movies and shows have affected my reading taste and my ideas about the world to this day. I'd love to know what you watched as a child and how you think it has affected you. Any tropes that you found, or any villains that you found particularly dislikable that you still don't like. To leave an emoji, perhaps something to do with movies. I think they have one of those chachunga things they do to mark when a scene's gonna start, or a camera. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!